How's it going, everybody? Monday Morning Quarterback, episode 72. Just got back a few hours ago from Wisconsin. We were up there this weekend for a doubleheader IRA race at Wilmot and Sun Prairie, and had a great time up there. Met a lot of customers. They've got a growing spec non-wing sprint car class, and then got to go on Sun Prairie on Sunday. Hadn't been there, man, I think since like 06 or 07. But it's good to get back to Sun Prairie. That's a great racetrack, and it was their Corn Fest week, which is always a fun one. And got to meet a lot of good customers. And Steve Sinclair there with the IRA group took good care of us, and definitely going to try to get back up there a few times next year because that was such a great weekend for us. And then today on our way back home, we stopped at Bailing's Racing Equipment. And I believe Butler, Wisconsin is where their actual town was. But what a cool place. Been there for almost 40 years. Really cool speed shop with literally floor-to-ceiling inventory. Everything you need to build a sprint car or midget, stock car, dirt late model, dirt modified. Just a ton of inventory there. And so it's really cool to get to see them. They started selling our products this year and have been a good partner for us up there in Wisconsin. So this week is the SmackDown, and that starts Wednesday night and runs through Saturday. So non-wing sprint cars at Kokomo every night, and we always look forward to going there. That's our favorite track in the state. So some good racing and a lot going on here this week. And then next week we go to Darlington for a national quarter midget race, and then come back for the BC 39. So a lot going on. The season's winding down around here, but it's good to get some travel going. Didn't really have a set topic tonight. I spent most of my day traveling. When I did get in here to the shop an hour or so ago, I've been playing catch up and trying to reply to emails and such. But we will definitely have a set program next week, as I've been working on this steering one. So we'll have that all done and ready to go for you next week. A couple of questions that I got this weekend that I thought were important to go over. This one pops up a lot, and it is my shock won't hold pressure. So 99% of the time, it's the inflation tool not sealing on the shock. And we've been over this a few times, but for those of you who have not heard, if the shock is leaking, and it's leaking internally inside the shock, then oil will come out of the Schrader valve, okay? So that's a tell-off. Oil is coming out of your Schrader valve. We've definitely got an internal problem in the shock. Again, though, like 99% of the time, it's just the gauge not sealing on the shock. And since we have such a small volume of nitrogen in there, it doesn't take but just a little leak when we're putting that gauge on, and it looks like the shock had no pressure in it. So if you over tighten that inflation tool, it'll ruin that copper crush washer, and we can replace that end, or you could put an O-ring on there to help it seal. But we had that a couple times this weekend, so definitely make sure that your inflation tool is sealing. And the one way to definitely do it is if you put pressure in the shock and then you put the gauge on and there's no pressure, and you think it's leaking out that quick, just put pressure in the shock, don't have the gauge on it, give it a minute, and then hit the Schrader valve and hear if there's anything left in the shock. If there is, you know the shock's not leaking that quickly. So another thing that is important is each week when you're done racing and you go to the car wash or you wash at home, whatever your normal routine is, the force shock should come off the car. If you're running covers, which we hope you are, the covers should come off the shocks. And we recommend to wash the shocks in warm water and simple green. Blow them off real good. Once everything's really clean, typically I would clean my shocks, blow them off, set them on the bench, and then the car would be on stands and do all my maintenance and everything. But it'd be a good way to then go back and check, make sure, number one, the shock's not leaking any oil after you clean it and it's sitting on the bench. If it's leaking, there'll be a wet seal or something like that. It's a great way to inspect the shafts, make sure there's no nick on the shaft anywhere, which would cause cause the seal to leak. If there was a sharp edge on the shaft and that went down in the shock, it would tear the seal. The other thing is to make sure there's not a dent anywhere in the body that's going to prevent the piston from moving up and down in the cylinder the way it should. So we went through this last summer, but once that shock's off, washed, clean, you should always fully extend it. Give it a nice slow stroke. Make sure that everything is feeling the way it should. There's not a dead spot in the shock, and that's just a good, safe way to check it if you don't have a shock dyno, and make sure that that you're putting the thing back on and there's nothing major wrong with it. You will see any major issue with the shock if you wash it, clean it, and then compress it slowly. A major issue, a broken base valve, or a broke gas bag, or it's pushed a bunch of oil out. You'll see a dead spot. There'll be some inconsistencies as you compress that shock. So on that note, if there is a dead spot and it's a gas shock, make sure there's gas in the shock, because if there's no gas in it, it'll feel like it has a dead spot. So very, very important to take care of that investment you've made in the good shocks, and make sure that everything's clean and working well, and the spherical bearings aren't bound up, and all that. So you can certainly wash the car with the shocks on it. I just like to take the shocks off the car, get the covers off, clean everything really good, then do my maintenance, inspect the shocks, and go that route. But you're not going to hurt them pressure washing them, but you just can never get them totally clean unless you get the covers and everything off. So jump over here and see what we have for questions. Good evening, Rick. Thanks for joining us. Steve, what quarter midget left rear right front spring would you use on a parking lot versus a semi-bank track? So spring-wise, we typically would run a little bit more left rear spring and a little bit less right front spring on a parking lot or a flat track, as we're needing to get that right front shock more into play. Typically, shock valvings are going to be the same on the right side. For junior classes like you're in, 2.5 valves if they're through shafts, or 3 valves if they're standard. And then on a parking lot, we might take a little bit more rebound out of the left rear. So we might go from a 3.2 to a 3.1 just to try to speed up that weight transfer to the right front. Trying to get the right front in the track and getting the car to run as small a circle as possible without scrubbing speed is definitely the key to parking lot racing. So Mark, I really don't worry about the amount of buildup it has. That you can have a great setup and have a ton of buildup, and have a great setup and have very little buildup, just based on the track, the temperature. If it's a really hot day and you're at a bank track that's got grip, there's nothing you're going to do to prevent that buildup. It's just part of it, and you can go super fast and win the race, and have a half a tenth or a tenth on the field and have a ton of buildup. So I don't pay too much attention to that. I do pay attention to the tire temperatures, and if the right rear is getting a lot hotter than the right front, then we'll need to look at tightening the car up, and vice versa. So Rick, when should you consider a different shock valving? This is a quarter midget question. So we generally can give you a really good baseline of what you need based on your kid's weight, the chassis you have, the tracks you're running. We would adjust shock valving if we're going from a really flat track to a really bank track, or really low grip to really high grip. As far as setup wise, shock valving is pretty lower on the list. I shouldn't say that as a shock guy, but there's a lot more powerful changes we can make to the setup if we need to make those big changes to get us where we need to be. And then the shock valving is a real fine-tuning device. So if your car's rolling around great, you got a really good balance, and you're just looking for a little bit more speed out of it, we can certainly achieve that sometimes with shock valving, and we can't with other things. But if you just have a poorly ill-handling race car, there's more powerful changes we would make with stagger and wheel spacing and ride heights and cross weights and where the ballast is in the car. Those are much more powerful changes on a quarter midget than shock valving. Steve, do I think profiling quarter midget tires is an advantage? I personally don't. I know there's some guys that do that and have been very successful with that. On my personal stuff, I've never seen much of a gain, and so I kind of have my own little tire program that I do. It doesn't involve a lathe. I've demonstrated that on our quarter midget setup classes and such. It's a pretty simple way, but for me, it's just a way to have a good, consistent tire every week and know that I'm on fresh rubber, but it doesn't really involve profiling the tire or cutting the tire. So when you're in the really low-powered classes, I think you could probably cut some rubber away where you're riding on a smaller contact patch and stuff like that. But at that point, you're really splitting hairs, in my opinion. And I feel like you can be successful and win a lot of races if you just do the small things right. So I think a lot of people overlook the really important small things with the car, and they try to kind of reinvent the wheel on some of that stuff, and it's not as big of an advantage as they'd hoped. Tim, thanks for tuning in. Congratulations on a fantastic weekend. Cool to see Zeb hitting his midsummer stride, and Sunshine's been a rocket all year in that midget. So looking forward to seeing you guys this week at Kokomo. Jared, what kind of racing are you doing as far as figuring out spring rates? If you can tell me what kind of racing you're doing, we probably have a baseline of notes that we can help get you pointed in the right direction. Josh, on pavement, quarter midgets, a lot of quarter midget questions tonight. Pavement, quarter midgets, I would always change the right front and the right rear together. They tend to wear out in the same fashion. And basically pavement, midgets, and sprint cars, we were the same. There were some tracks where you might hurt the right front more than the right rear, but for the most part, you would change right sides together. Jared, quarter midget, if you can comment with your driver's weight and the chassis you have and what type of track you're running at, I'd be more than happy to help you. Or if you want to DM me that information, I can get you that as well. So Ryan Mitchell joined. Nolan had a big weekend with a couple wins. So that was awesome. We also had Jake Swanson win out at Paris. Jeff Zielinski won last night at Cornfest when we were up there, so congratulations to him. I didn't get a chance to see him after the race, but he drove a great race and kind of picked the leader's pocket in lap traffic, so that was really cool. Got to spend time with Scotty Neitzel up there, another dealer of ours at R&H Enterprises, and he led a bunch of the feature the first night. The Wing 410 feature ended up second, and come from ninth to fourth last night, so it was good to see Scotty. Known him forever. When I worked at MPD as a teenager, him and his dad's Harry's Speed Shop was a dealer for us at MPD. So, Mark, so if a hotter right front indicates loose, does a hotter right rear indicate tight? You have that opposite. So if the right rear is getting hotter, typically the car's loose, and if the right front's getting hotter, typically you have a push or it's tight. So I like to, so typically the right rear will get a touch hotter even when you have a really good balance. Again, this is a quarter midget question. I never like to see more than 10 pounds hotter, or 10 degrees hotter, I'm sorry. So if you're within 10 degrees right front to right rear, with the right rear being hotter, I think you got an okay balance. If you're more than that or less than that, then adjustments need to happen. Tim, do I ever run lead in a quarter midget? I don't often, but there are certain places we do, like Macachee, some really bitty narrow tracks with tight corners we will. But for the most part, I run my car square. Anybody else have any questions tonight? We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Again, next week we're going to do a segment on steering gears and pumps and the importance of getting those rebuilt, and kind of show you some behind the scenes of that new division here at CSI. And then we're also working on a segment kind of on the engineering, as we're working on designs for new products for next year. We have a new design engineer that we hired a few weeks ago, a young kid who just graduated from Purdue with an ME, and so we'll do a segment with Brett kind of on some of our design processes. Yeah, Jamie, good question. So going wing to non-wing in a pavement midget, there's quite a bit different you'll do. You can use the same shocks, there'll be different settings. Your springs will definitely be different, and your ride height will be different just because of the speed. So you'll have to raise the car up some, and you'll have to go with some stiffer springs versus non-wing. So we don't do a lot of that anymore. I know that NEMA series out east still runs with some wing pavement midgets. So I don't have a ton of experience with that, but when we would go from a pavement sprint car to a wing pavement sprint car, those are the things we would do to get a good balance. Dave, thanks for tuning in. Adam, appreciate you guys tuning in. No more questions? All right. We thank you guys. 72 episodes strong. Please like and share so all your friends can see it. I spent some time while I was traveling today uploading all of these to our YouTube page. So if you got friends that aren't on social media, all 71 episodes up through tonight are on our YouTube page. Just search CSI Shocks. And there's a Monday Morning Quarterback tab, so they're all sorted there. If I missed your question, let us know, and I will get it answered. And we hope you have a fantastic week. Thank you.